Hello, Tyler Bryden here. I hope everything's going well. Today, talking about something interesting. This is actually from a few years back, but I think is timely considering that Y Combinator's deadline for their applications just closed. There's thousands of companies who have applied for Y Combinator, and now a select few of those are being selected to then interview with the Y Combinator team. And so in this video, I want to talk about our experience, Speak AI, in September 2020, having an interview with Y Combinator and Michael Seibel of YC. And this was, super, super scary, challenging, nervous experience. I would say almost borderline traumatic, but in a positive way that just expedites and accelerates self-growth. And also that, a couple, I think, disclaimers off this is we did this interview, and I'll talk about the actual interview itself. We did not get into YC. We got a nice email from Michael after, and I'll share a little bit more about that. Also that this is sort of my perspective of this experience, of this interview. There were other people there besides Michael, one including my CTO. And then if I hadn't blacked out in the moment, some amazing people who are obviously part of the YC team and helping select the companies that do get accepted. So if you don't know what YC is, I've shared several videos on them in the past. I'll just pop this up so you can see, and you can get the classic inception of tool. So recently I did that Y Combinator Winter 2023 application, which I was glad to see. Got some good feedback and inspired some people to apply, and then a couple other pieces here, including a warning letter to founders about the market conditions that have changed. And in part of this, I actually talk about their role in the market environment that has happened in sort of venture capital. And I want to talk a little bit about that in the video because it's sort of been apparent in my mind recently as I've thought a little bit more about some of the things happening right now. And I've got, as always, a couple of links and resources so you can see, they've almost done 4,000 startups, 9,000 founders, 1 trillion in market value, and some huge, amazing, successful companies that have come out of YC. And, for myself, for Vadsel, for many people who are building tech companies and young and early in their career, and I say that now as I'm turning 30 and not necessarily that early in my career anymore, that YC is sort of like the gold standard and something that we all aspire to. And so, it was a huge moment to successfully apply to get at least the interview with Michael. And I'm, a huge, I'm very grateful for that opportunity, the connection, the questions that he gave us in those 10 minutes, and then the email response that he gave after about, why they hadn't chose to proceed with us. And overall, I've learned so much from him. I have a lot of admiration, and he's had a ton of success throughout his career. A lot of it directly connected to Twitch, which then sold to Amazon, and you can find videos on him. I'll link a couple in case you're wanting to check those out. I've also got his LinkedIn. I've got the YC Twitter, and I'll actually drop Michael Twitter in here as well too. But I did want to sort of talk about, I'm not able to show the actual specific application itself, and maybe one time I'll pull it up and do it. I just want to talk about the actual interview, and I'll say, for anyone, again, hopefully what I'm sharing from my experience helps you prepare for yours and maybe gives you a higher chance of success than you would have if you hadn't heard this video or watched this video, and maybe some insights that I didn't know as I went into the conversation. And first of all, I guess the first one was we didn't actually know we were interviewing with Michael. We had no idea who we were going to be interviewing with for this YC app, for this interview. And it was just like a little bit of a shock right away. I think both Vatsal and I felt that immediately. Is like, even though it makes sense now in retrospect, when we had done a lot of preparation, talking with people who had gone through YC, we did mock interviews, ones that went poorly, and then had moved towards actually being pretty good, and we had gotten good feedback on. It just hadn't really fully crossed our mind explicitly that it was going to be Michael. And so there was a moment of sort of shock that came when we realized we were talking directly to him and that this was going to have a huge impact on the success of our application and then generally our life. I think if we had gone into YC, especially at 2020, in the sort of peak of this frothy market, we would have accelerated Speak AI in a huge way. And I think our lives would be very different right now. So that's interesting. It's own that there's like a 10-minute microcosm that can actually have a substantial impact on your life. And in my way, in some cases, I feel that, I actually failed in this moment. This was a moment of failure for me personally, where I was not convincing enough to believe in myself, and then also obviously the vision that we had in the company. And I do recommend, if you are being asked to interview, reach out to as many YC founders as you can and do mock interviews with them. 10 minutes run through. They're going to drill you with hard questions, and that's a huge preparation for the actual final interview. Also say that you cannot prepare necessarily for the interview to go the way that you want. And at the time, we only had almost 400 users who had ever signed up for the system. Now we're almost towards 7,000. But our tech was actually relatively strong early in, and so we thought that was our huge sort of differentiator and a key part of what we wanted the pitch to be. And so we did these nice little introductions. We punch. And then we said, hey, we'd love to show you a demo of the platform. And immediately he was like, okay, well, let's talk about this first. And so right away we had this plan that sort of fell apart immediately. And all our sort of, we really thought that once we sort of walked through the product, that would be, a huge part of what we quickly realized. And I think this is a lesson for, anyone in sort of startups or building businesses or whatever it is that you should be focusing on the customers and the problem that they have and not necessarily the solution. And that's, I think, a constant thing that we've dealt with here at Speak AI. And I think just a lot of people who love technology deal with in general is we love the technology. We don't necessarily think about the problem and the solution, the problem and the customer and their, how they interact with it and what's their workflow and what's breaking for them and what makes them not fall asleep at night and the pain that they face. Those are things that we sometimes forget as we fall in love with the technology, and especially in the market where it was if you had this idea for tech and you knew enough people, you could throw around some buzzwords, AI, and then it became NFT, blah, blah, blah. And you could get funded and then grow the business. Those were all sort of readily apparent and left us, not as focused as we should have been. And he, really drilled on us is that, first of all, he wanted a very specific example of how our application worked. We sort of talked about how you could say hook into Zoom and then transcribe and analyze that call and then the value that was coming out of it. And so that was, we thought we answered a lot of questions relatively succinctly. I think our answers at the start were much shorter and more concise, which was a goal and what we had heard over and over again for Y Combinator interviews, which is try to answer as many questions as possible and don't worry about answering them in super in depth, because you want them to be able to ask as many questions as they can get through and give them good responses to those. Whereas you could easily waste, 2 minutes responding to a specific question and then they don't get the answers that they're looking through in this interview. So I think we actually started at high volume, quick, succinct responses right at the start. And then slowly I fell into my own ways in those and started to answer in more detail. And I think and I'll talk about it a little bit more, sort of not tension ratcheted up, but confusion or questioning required or answers required. I started to sense that and be a little more, just fall out of that planned state and, default back to my own way, which is, if you're watching this video, you can see is filled with lots of talking, sometimes talking very quickly and over explaining things that probably don't need that much explaining. So there you go. The couple of things that, and then along with that specific example, first of all, I felt unconvinced at that moment. And then we sort of talked about, he wanted to go deeper into who these customers were. And in a way, we at that time, and I would say still don't struggle to sort of articulate exactly who our customers are, because of the platform we've built has multiple sort of job titles and use cases that are a part of our system, which can be a strength, can also be a weakness depending on how you look at it. And so when we describe those customers, and again, you should be able to define this very clearly as you possibly can. I think that wasn't as hard hitting as he thought. It wasn't as specific and detailed as he wanted, or as what they had seen in patterns of YC companies who had been successful, knowing their customers, talking to them to an ongoing basis, and sort of adhering to this mantra of make something people want, talk to your customers, build something that your customers want, something that your customers need. And so There were other questions that emerged that were very specific to us. And I think Vatsel's, as CTO of the company, his sort of feedback or thought was that he was surprised that there weren't more things about sort of the product itself. There was only really one technical question about the transcription and how do we do transcription? Do we have an insight into a way to make it speedier or cheaper than others? And I think that spoke to, now reflecting back on it, to a saturated market that maybe that he had concerns with. And I'm sure that he knew other people would have concerns with, other investors and everything. And I think overall spoke to this idea that from a high level, he's seeing thousands and thousands of applications, and that there were a lot of people interested in the same problem space, maybe not with the exact same solutions as us, but interested in that same problem space. And with that, not enough differentiation, not a big enough moat, and a challenge that could be there. So, although I would say Michael is a very calm person, that's when I talked about both, is how once we actually got talking, while I sort of went a little manic and haywire, I actually did feel relatively calm. He induces that feeling. It can still be relatively challenging and intense, and he really doesn't want to deal with bullshit. He wants very clear answers, and don't try to input any technical jargon or anything like that is unnecessary, which, sort of did multiple times. That is just going to ratchet up and create more tension in that call, and really end up leading you to most likely not be accepted to YC. And you can be, with so many companies applying, that's a very high likelihood that just a couple instances of that could make them lose trust in you as a founder and someone who needs to articulate your product and solution to customers, that might not work out. And I think that's a valid concern, and something that we've continued to try to get better at. And so make sure that you can explain your product clearly and demonstrate that you're able to articulate this to customers, because in the end, especially considering the market environment that we're in, you're going to be able to need to sell to customers and convince them that your product is worthwhile. And a lot of times, the simpler you can do that, the better. So, there's one thing that I wanted to sort of talk about here, which was a super interesting part. And I would say about three quarters through the interview, I sort of ended up, I don't exactly know why, talking about a little bit of my sort of personal journey about how I had started Speak AI, and how some of that had actually come from sort of a mental health perspective, and wanting to sort of quantify and analyze the language data that I was creating. Some of it through Evernote, some of it was through audio and video recordings, et cetera, et cetera. And how, at the time I was using Evernote, and I wish there had been a system that had automatically analyzed those notes and helped me understand myself better. And the thread that I had tried to tie through is that the system that we're building is capable of helping people for both personal and sort of professional development. And then what was revealed in, further questioning is that while we're super interested in sort of this personal analytics part, that really none of our revenue had come through that. And all of our revenue had come through more of the sort of Zoom transcribing and analysis, and, more customer business oriented solutions using our same platform. And then, what emerged in that was sort of this encouragement from Michael and the feedback is basically this encouragement to follow the more personal analytics path, because they had heard pitches similar to what we were talking about from the business side, but the way that we were talking about sort of how I used it for personal analytics was quite novel to them, and something that they were actually super interested in. And Michael had actually been talking about this on Twitter and stuff publicly, about using systems to help understand yourselves better and then improve atomic habits and things like that. And then this is where this really sort of interesting conversation came out. And I would say like a challenge that then to me is a little bit of a foreshadowing in the market environment. And then people sort of talking about Y Combinator being, at least partly responsible for the overvaluation of companies and startups. And basically, the feedback in the final email was that you are, it seems like you're running two companies, or you're pitching one thing and you're building another thing. And I believe in that, I believe in that message that he actually gave back. I also believe that, we were trying to build almost like a horizontal product that allowed us to do these two things. And I think at the time we also didn't understand some of the limitations that we were going to then face moving forward, whether security or compliance or the difficulty of analyzing personal data, all these things. But he sort of encouraged us to follow that path. And I said, hey, I'm, sort of self-funding and bootstrapping this company. And if we didn't have any customers paying us to do this, we would never even be able to develop the technology and solutions to then help maybe more on this personal analytics side. And I remember at this point there was a lot of frustration in the call, and just this sort of recommendation of, hey, if that's what you want to do with the personal analytics, then do it, and don't worry about the how much customers you have or how much revenue you have in this moment. Just do it and then move forward, and the money will come. And for me, from someone who had not lived the life that he had lived, and not from Silicon Valley and all this stuff, that was a really sort of difficult sort of message for me to intake, because it was like, to me, I come from a little bit more of like, I'm in middle class income, and I'd gone through a difficult time, and I started my own company, and if I didn't have revenue in that company, then there was no company. And then with Speak AI, because of a couple of the ups and downs of COVID and everything, I had taken out some personally liable loans, which I'm grateful that are now paid back. But, there was no other opportunity for me. I didn't have the network. I didn't have the investors. I didn't have that. And, from my understanding, showing traction in terms of revenue and customers was actually a valuable thing. And I don't think I'm explicitly saying that Michael is saying, hey, go, don't abandon all your sort of work that is actually producing paying customers. I think he was saying, if you're truly, interested in this vision, build it, people will come, investors will come, and you will then learn and figure out how to build a sustainable business that can get customers. And I have skepticism around that. And I think a lot of the companies that have gone this route are probably really struggling right now, or just relying on VC money and burning through it. But, I think this was, for me, one of those moments where I sort of deviated and struggled with the message that Michael gave us in that interview, and sort of reflected on it after that. If it hadn't been for some of those customers and some of the work that we had done to make sure it worked in a business and team perspective, that we wouldn't have even been able to make it to this YC interview. There would be nothing there. So, overall, I think this was, I'm at 16 minutes talking about this right now. It was I could talk, on and on about little pieces that came from it, but I think I've hit a couple of the, the pieces here. And, this is not an interview of like how to prepare, or not like a video on like how to prepare for a YC interview, because first of all, we didn't get in. And so I don't think I'm in the state to make that recommendation. I just wanted to sort of share my experience, and I'll read sort of the final feedback that we got from Michael. And I think that brings then his perspective in after I've sort of given some of my perspective, which was the final feedback was, this was a tough decision because we really liked how passionate you were about the space, and you've gathered good usage and revenue in a short time. But our major concern is that you had multiple use cases that were not clear. I agree with that. The consumer and B2B use cases were so different from one another, it seems like you were running two different companies. I encourage you to choose and double down on the one you are most passionate about. I do think, so that was sort of an email that came from Michael after, at the time we had been, after the call, Vatsil and I had reflected, and we were actually overall relatively optimistic about being able to adapt to the 10-minute, sort of the path that we thought we were going on, and then the path we ended up on. We thought that we might get called in for a second conversation. That conversation never came, and then we had received that email. We, responded to it politely, and, did not push back too much, even though we had seen people definitely more attention in that call than I had sort of experienced, even with talking to other investors. Michael had shaken his head multiple times. Part of that was just me. At one point he said, hey, can you explain this to me as if I was your mom? So there was definitely signs for us that we had not treaded the same path, although we had actually done some good things. And, with that reflection, I'll listen back to a reflection that Vatsil and I took in after we did the call. And, we'd both felt we'd answered things as pretty well and as best we could, considering everything. And so, definitely it was a deviation of a path that we, didn't necessarily know that we were going to go on. We didn't know if we were going to get that YC application. We had applied multiple times. I think that one was actually one of the quicker applications we had put in, but I think our sort of growth trajectory at the time was really good. I'm interested to know, if you are, first of all, if you're applying and you're having an interview, I'd love to hear a comment or something, or send me a message. If I can give any other insight, I would be happy to, considering everything I've shared here. I'm interested to know how, is there a change in it. Like there's been some articles like this, why Combinator is still paranoid. And obviously there's been this sort of letter about, the changing environment. And I've been lucky enough to talk with other people who are, in sort of positions of startups up, some with good traction, some early, some with a little bit of traction, and the challenges of fundraising. And, we know that interest rates are going to continue to expand, that there's a lot of things happening in a macroeconomic environment that could have an impact on this for several years to come. And although YC is, seeming to honor their increased investment of $500,000, they're, relatively taking smaller cohorts. And I'm guessing that they are sometimes prioritizing other things over maybe things that they had prioritized in the past. And so I hope I gave you some insights. This was my sort of own perspective of interviewing with Michael. I'm grateful for the experience. To me, it was life-changing, even though it didn't turn out into us getting into YC. I wish, in many ways, I wish that that had happened. And I think that if we had done a couple things differently, that would have been a path that we had gone in, and life would have been much differently. But I also think that, as much as I sometimes struggle to deal with this, life is, sort of what meant to be is meant to be. And I'm glad to have the life that I have now, the beautiful partner, beautiful dog, and still a business that is growing and generating revenue. While, maybe some other companies that, took that route, they over-optimized on VC money, never really truly listened to their customers and built tech. And now that is very difficult to execute on, or maybe they raised at a revenue multiple that was absolutely insane that they are not going to be able to hit. And so there's going to be a lot of scrutiny and a lot of chaos as that emerges, where we're obviously in a different spot here at Speak AI. So thank you so much for checking this out. This has been Tyler Bryden, the co-founder of a company called Speak AI. We really look at like language data sets and try to extract insights from them as quickly as possible with little as code as possible. And I think we're doing a pretty good job of that. Lots more left to do, but it's a super interesting space, and we're super proud to be a part of it, and appreciate you checking this out. I hope you have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye.